Hi, welcome to Happy to See Me, the podcast that puts the spotlight on the overlooked and underestimated. I'm Erika Casupanan, and many know me as an underestimated winner, and I love to talk to people about their journeys or experiences that we might have overlooked or underestimated and not understood. And today I am speaking to social worker and psychotherapist Vera Cheng about Asian mental health. But first, I normally like to start each episode by talking about something that I was happy to see that week. And I will be honest, I'm struggling to figure out what my thing I was happy to see is this week. Yeah. Normally I have something prepared, and who knows, maybe it's the pressure of, the social media of it all and wanting to make sure that I always have something insightful or cool or a fun update to share. But this week, if I could be honest, all I've done is work hard, cook myself meals, break a few plates. Actually, nothing broke, but I dropped some plates, dropped some bowls right before this interview, so barely made it on time. So I guess what I'm happy to see this week is I've showed up, and maybe that is enough. And I also record this weeks in advance. So by the time you've seen this, who knows, maybe there's stuff that I'm just overjoyed to share with you. But right now, what I'm happy to see is I have made it on time to this recording. And I think that that's fitting because I am speaking to a mental health expert and advocate. Perfectionism is actually a big part of mental health and a big part of intergenerational trauma. So who knows, maybe me not having something big to share plays in nicely with the theme of this episode. This episode, I'm speaking to Vera Cheng. She is a registered social worker, psychotherapist, mental health advocate, and speaker. So she grew up East Asian. She was an East Asian immigrant here in Canada, and that influenced her therapy practice. So with her practice, she engages with Asian millennials and she helps them to improve their self-awareness, address intergenerational trauma, and make positive changes in their life. And she is also an advocate who has spoken up against anti-Asian racism. In this episode, we talk all things Asian mental health. We talk about relationships with Asian parents, intergenerational trauma, how things like overthinking and perfectionism could be rooted in something else, and she shares her tips for finding a therapist. So this is actually a good conversation if we want to be vulnerable and open when it comes to our mental health. I got a lot out of this, and I hope you will too. So without further ado, this is Vera Cheng. I hope you enjoy it. When you first started your schooling, did you expect that as a therapist, you wanted to specialize in the Asian North American experience? Or did this just kind of become something you fell into?
I think it just becomes something I fell into because in my education background, I'm a social worker. So I've been in the medical and community practice for the last over 15 years. And I started my private practice, talk therapy with Vera, at the beginning of the pandemic. And then at first I was just going to do like a general population with mental health issue. And then somehow all of a sudden, all the Asian population, especially millennials, start approaching me because they wanted to find somebody who has similar background as them, but also experienced similar mental health trauma, like intergenerational childhood trauma, which I have openly discussed on my blog and even on Instagram. So it's crazy that I'm somehow attracted to the Asian millennial population, which is great because, just because I'm a therapist, I'm just as human as everyone is.
Of course. And it does help so much that you have had that experience yourself and you can understand the barriers that some of your clients face. I've seen online a stat that said that stigma prevents 84% of Asian Canadians with depression or anxiety from getting medical help. So why is mental health and therapy a taboo subject within Asian households?
I think there is that model minority myth that there's a lot of pressure, right, to be successful in both academic and professional. And we tend to, because we want to be focused on professional life and academic life, we tend to ignore our symptoms or deny our mental health symptoms. But at the same time, like you said, it has been a taboo topic, especially there's a lot of shame bringing in that mean that like you're labeled as either weak or crazy. I think that's usually what happens when a lot of people in the Asian community are struggling. Unless people start seeing like other celebrities, whether it's Simu Liu, whether it's, Chrissy Teigen, or even like as a therapist myself, I'll start opening up about my own mental health journey that, hey, it's okay to get support. Like just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean that I don't have mental health issue. Like I said, I'm just as human as everyone is.
I totally relate to that, especially the idea of shame. I started going to a therapist probably 6 years ago now. I've been seeing a therapist on and off. And
Mm-hmm.
I also believe that there's this weird like mental gymnastics you do where you think, oh, but my life on paper is good. I don't have, quote unquote, major traumas. So maybe I don't need to see a therapist, and there's just something wrong with me. And it's hard unless, as you said, you see those models of people who are deciding that they're going to speak out and be open about how they're going to therapy. What are some cultural differences that Asian children growing up in North America, whether they're first, second, third generation immigrants, what are some cultural differences that might make it difficult to them to access mental health resources?
Well, I think what happened is that I'm going to use my own personal example. I think that when I first moved here for about 30 years ago, that I think you're supposed to, like I said earlier, like you're supposed to be strong. There's nothing wrong with you. And if there's something wrong, we also don't talk about it openly
Mm-hmm.
in the family, right? And I think that there's a lot of responsibility or even like authoritative like figure that we have to obey our parents, or our parents have to like obey their own parents. That really leading to like, well, like, what's wrong with you? Why are you crying?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you need the support? Why do you need help? You're fine, right? There's a lot of dismissive aspects on top of that as well, where which leading to people kind of reluctant to seek mental health support. But in the North American culture, it's that where they talk more openly, or depends it also depends on the parents, like in the household, how it is, right? Some people, some households are more open, and where the children can actually talk to their parents and seek support.
I feel like just based on talking to my own friends who are Asian and thinking about my own experience, is there an element of the parents see the child almost like an extension of themselves? And if there is something, quote unquote, wrong with the child and they feel like they need mental health support, that could reflect on how the parent sees themselves?
It really depends. I think it really depends. I think oftentimes some parents, they do internalize that there's something wrong with them, which leading them for their kids having these mental health problems. Or sometimes that when, even for example, if our parents' generation grew up not having that mental health support, or like being so dismissive by their own parents, that means that like we need to sort of suck it up and just be strong and don't speak up about it. I think that really which leading to a lot of different mental health issue.
In terms of non Asian people in North America, is there anything that they might misunderstand about the culture of Asian people, first, second, third generation Asian people in North America?
In Asian culture, our parents encourage like their kids, or like taught us to be more obedient instead of being more assertive, right? Being able, instead of being speaking up, because obviously, when you speak up, meaning like you're trying to stir trouble, which we don't want that, right? We need to like keep our head down, do all the work, and just suck it in, right? But in the North American culture, they're taught to be more assertive and being able to set more boundaries. It's a little bit easier. But at the same time, once the kids, like grow up, that means that they are having trouble being like, where they're setting boundaries or being assertive, because they're just like, or having that people pleasing skills. That, okay, yeah, everything is fine. I know I'll do it, but on the inside, it's like we're probably like have a lot of resentment, or like and frustration, which I'm seeing a lot of my clients having this type of issues.
That is something that I have found to be so frustrating. And I've seen it with my friends who are Asian, and in particular with my friends who are Asian women, where, yeah, there's this contrast between at home, you're taught to be good, whatever good or however good is defined by your parents, but that's usually someone who's more likely to, follow the rules, obey their elders. And then on the flip side, in North America, generally, people tend to really reward people who are more bold and assertive. But then that's, in conflict with how we're taught in terms of our Asian culture. And then it leads to a lot of people just being frustrated and not knowing how they're supposed to move forward. Is this something that you see quite often? And, what's your advice for people who are trying to work through that?
I'm really glad you brought on this question because that's one of the main theme that I'm seeing with a lot of my clients. And I think that it is a process, right? Because we've learned as a kid for the last 30 plus years that we're taught to be good, or we're being told that we need to follow all the rules, and when you don't follow them, that mean our parents will shame us or being dismissive. And in the sessions, in my therapy sessions, I have to not just help them process their own childhood trauma, but also helping them to learn how to reframe and help them to change their behavior, that they are good enough. Because I think it's the internal dialogue, the internal critic, that we're like, oh no, like we're not good enough, or like no matter what we do, it's like we can never achieve whatever goals that we have, which is not true.
It's such a weird thing to grapple with, right? I think about how, to me, for example, being told the rules within reason, I think, okay, following the rules means I'm showing respect and I want to be respectful of everyone. But then you also hear things like, oh, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and it just leaves you confused and unsure of how to move forward. So, yeah, I guess it's a lot of self work about one's self worth to help get through that.
Yes. I think it's also, I think one thing I do want to mention, it's also being patient and having compassion towards yourself. Like it's not just like you go to a therapist for a month, then you think that your problem or like the issue will be resolved, because it doesn't work that way, right? It does take a long time to rewire your brain on how to, whether setting the boundaries, but also process the trauma that you've gone through.
Oh, 100%. I feel, at least with my personal therapy journey, I've been going on and off for 6 years. And then I would have a few months where I would really want to talk about a specific issue, and I'd be going every week, every other week. But then I'd feel like, okay, that's resolved. And I'd take a few months off.
Mm-hmm.
And then something would pop up that's different. And I'd think, okay, now I want to go and talk about that again. So I'd start seeing the therapist and then off again. So that's the other thing I realized, that it's not like you go and all of a sudden you have your breakthrough and you understand why you are the way you are and you never have to go again. It's always something that's in motion, and it's always a journey.
Oh, I agree with you. It's also, I think, also being consistent with it, right? Like you said, like you go in the beginning a little bit more frequent, and then once you start feeling better, you either take a break or just space out the session, which is technically some of my clients that have been with me for a very long time, and they are doing that.
And I think that especially now, if people have access to therapy through benefits and things, I know that not every job has the health benefits available for therapy, but if you do, it's worth going even to see, because you never know what you can uncover through those sessions. The things that I learned about myself and the things that I learned were really, the root of why I am the way I am. I would have never expected that had I not gone to therapy.
No, I agree. I think that, like everyone should seek therapy like once in a lifetime, just to work through some of their trauma or some of the symptoms or issues, right?
100%. And I want to ask about intergenerational trauma. That's a term that I've heard so much more over the last few years. So, can you explain what intergenerational trauma is?
So it's trauma, but it's not just only like experienced by one person. It's actually being passed down from one generation to the next generation. So, for example, when one of my clients experienced childhood trauma, such as her mom yelling at her or calling her mean names, or to discipline them, this could also mean that her mother have had similar experiences growing up from her mom. And that's how they learn, like that's how they learn from the childhood. That mean like, oh, yelling or name calling, it's a form of a discipline, and that's okay. But however, it does transfer it into when their parents were being treated, like going through therapy with their trauma, then it will actually transfer to the children. And which really leading to like, whether it's through attachment bonding or messaging about viewing of themselves on the world, like how whether safety or danger of the world, right? Because I think that's usually what happened when their parents are not, have their own trauma, but they haven't been properly treated with therapy.
Thank you for explaining that. I think that sometimes the idea of international trauma, it makes people believe that, oh, some big, crazy, awful thing must have happened in order for there to be this intergenerational trauma passed down. But it could just be one generation not being able to, not having the tools to manage whatever is hurting them. And then those behaviors end up trickling down to the next generation and the next generation. And it could be things that in the grand scheme of things could seem minor, but actually over time could have a real impact on you. Is that fair to say?
Yes. So, for example, like the client that I'm having right now, they have kids. So they coming to me to work through their own trauma, intergenerational childhood trauma, because they don't want to pass it down on to their kids. So that's just one example. They're just trying to breaking the pattern. And that's what we are working on, like in my therapy session. But at the same time, like you said, the childhood trauma can definitely impact our self-esteem, or like, or even like being a perfectionist, or even being like very hard on ourselves, right? Because I think a lot of times that, in my assessment when I'm working with my client, I always ask them, so do you describe yourself as a perfectionist? Are you hard on yourself? Do you compare yourself to other people? Because I think those are very important.
What I learned from your social media recently is that so many things that we just consider to be, a regular part of our personality, it could be the result of intergenerational trauma. So I want to ask you about a few of these. You mentioned being a perfectionist. Could perfectionism be a result of intergenerational trauma? And, what could it say about a person and the way that they were, and what could it say about a person and their upbringing?
So I think one thing that I would dive a little bit deeper when they're telling me they describe themselves as a perfectionist. I would ask them like, okay, so, like as a kid when you were growing up, like how did your parents like treated you? And I'll be really curious, like, first of all, do they compare you to other kids or your siblings, or do they even, or being very critical about like, oh, you didn't get, why didn't you get an A? You're supposed to get an A, right? Like A is supposed to be like the best, the best
Mm-hmm.
thing. But even like, I mean, yes, I understand the parents have a lot of expectation, have a lot of hope for their kids who want them to like success in life with professional academic earlier. But at the same time, they also don't, like the parents also don't understand that it really impact their kids, which leading them to have like become a perfectionist, or like, or having that low self-esteem issue, because those expectations are so unrealistic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel that there's so many people who can relate to that and think that their perfectionism is just, a fun personality quirk, but it turns out there's roots somewhere else. I want to ask about another one. Is overthinking a potential result of intergenerational trauma? And I totally consider myself an overthinker. I think about everything from a million different angles.
I think it really depends on,
Mhm.
again, going back to how your parents treated you, right? Like, did you like, did you always, for example, like, did you always get in trouble, or like, or do they always blame you for something that you didn't do, whether you've done it or you didn't do it, right? Because I think that, looking back as a kid, you are innocent, and you're still learning as a kid. Obviously, you're going to learn a lot of mistakes. But if your parents' behavior were to blame you for every little thing that you've done, then you start overthinking, you start analyzing, oh, did I do something wrong? Is there something wrong with me, right? Like, again, that really leading to, like, am I good enough for this, like, for this task or for this job?
Oh, yeah, I can relate. My parents will listen to this. And yeah, I was always in trouble, but I was just a kid. But we're cool now,
Yes.
don't worry. And I feel this is actually where it's so nice to be in community with other people. In particular, I love being in community with different Asian women because now I love to bounce, different scenarios I went through with them or tell them stories about things that happened. And I love to ask, like, am I crazy? Am I overthinking this? And then to have someone who understands, yes, I'm an overthinker, but no, you're not crazy, or no, you didn't do anything wrong. And I think that, it's great to go to therapy and to talk about these things. And in addition, it's great to be open and finding community with people who have these shared experiences too, and they can validate how you're feeling.
No, I agree. I think that we don't have a lot of like we don't talk about this openly, or we don't have that community that we can actually validate each other or normalize the type of that it's a normal behavior, or like, hey, that's not, you're not crazy, you know what I mean? But I think that it's quite tough because oftentimes that we internalize, we're thinking, oh, I'm the problem.
Oh yeah, I've thought that so many times. But then it's funny because I'm sure someone from the external could see somebody who is potentially such a rule follower, potentially someone who always appears to be obedient, and wonder how could they think that they're the problem all the time, but it's just the result of potentially the way that they grew up.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with you on that. And it's tough, right? Because you have all these 30 plus years of experiences. Like I said, it's not just one night. You can just change that, it's a process to work through in your therapy journey with your therapist.
Definitely. And there's continuously so much to learn. I learned a new term from looking at your social media page. So the term is parentification. So
Mm-hmm.
what is parentification and why is it prevalent within minority groups?
So parentification is when a child growing up is regularly expected to provide emotional and mental or practical support for a parent, instead of receiving that support from themselves. And that basically is a role reversal, because basically then you become the parent for your parents,
Mm-hmm.
instead of your parents supposed to be supporting you. And this really have a long-term negative impact of kids growing up, that can impact their physical and mental health journey. Because why is this happening? It's because often our parents in the parents' generation, they don't have that support from their partner, from their family, from the community. So they turn to their kids for support. And it really gives a lot of pressure, right? Because as kids, you're supposed to be, like getting support from your parent, but in the other end, it's a reversal. And this is also another major theme of what I'm seeing in my clients during therapy. And it really sucks, because then I mean that, as a kid, you need to really grow up quite fast,
Mm-hmm.
and to become very independent. And this really impacts also like in your adult life, because then now your parents are, even as an adult children, then your parents are constantly relying, or the codependent, or relying on you for support. And it's really hard to also set that boundaries with your parents, because when you say no to your parent, there's you probably might know your parents will either start manipulate you, or saying, oh, like, why can't you do this to me, for me? I've done, look how much stuff I've done. And it's like, then you start feeling guilty,
Mm-hmm.
and shame. And I have to, as a therapist, and I have to actually help my client to process the shame and guilt, to not internalize those feelings.
What is an example of a behavior that's considered parentification that one would engage in when they're a kid?
So, for example, I think it's when growing up, that when your parents is really relying on, like I said, relying on you for emotional support, so they'll start telling you about their problem as a kid growing up, right? And they're expecting you to sort of give them advice. But then you're just a kid. You're not a professional. You're not a therapist. Or they expect you to fix the problem. And I think that really leading to growing up as an adult, then like their mentality is like, I need to fix a problem right away. They go straight into fixing the problem versus just listening.
Mm-hmm.
But even as a kid, we don't have the capacity of that developmental stage or mindset to really help our parents because we're
Mm-hmm.
just kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that really take away their own childhood experiences.
So what's an example of a behavior that one does because of parentification once they're an adult?
I think going back, like I said earlier, I think what happened is that when, as an adult children, when your parents are constantly coming to you, still coming to you for emotional support, or whether it's emotional, but also like, oh, now you need to help us out, whether it's financially or bringing us to the appointment, right? Then we have that what is it? Going like that mentality is then it's starting to become very transactional. That because like like I brought you here to give you good education or like and good experiences. Now you need to help me because we're old when we need your help.
If those behaviors continue on,
Mm-hmm.
what happens then when that now adult goes on to have children of their own?
Right. So then, if you don't recognize that that's a problem, then the adult children are gonna rely on their kids for emotional support. That's a major red flag, right? Because their kids. That means that the intergenerational trauma is passing down because their kids are not going to have proper childhood either, right? And I think that in order for the adult children to break the pattern, is that they have to recognize that they might have starting to have a lot of resentment toward their own parents, or they recognize that, oh, this is a behavior I don't want to pass it down to my kids. Then I need to start seeking out support from a professional.
That's good that your work is now helping to address some of this behavior. So then, yeah, that chain of intergenerational trauma can come to an end at this current generation. And what's good is I believe that now there's more people talking about mental health and therapy. So it's becoming less and less taboo. Lots of my friends who are millennials have now gone to therapy at some point in their lives. And I find that for a lot of people, going to therapy has helped people to better empathize with their parents. So, what are some things that people learn about their parents throughout the course of therapy that helps them to better empathize with them?
It's recognizing that their parents probably have their own trauma that they don't know how to deal with it, or they never dealt with it, right? And I think it's having that compassion piece that they probably experienced their trauma through growing up, and that's why it's leading them to have that type of behavior. I think it's also recognizing that it's not their parents' fault that how they treated you, because they didn't know how, like they didn't have proper parenting skill growing up, or they didn't have a proper childhood. I think it's building and really reminding yourself and reframing the mindset that my parents had a shitty childhood and they were probably having a lot of responsibility growing up too, and that's how they're passing on to that responsibility to their own kids. And I think that's when I would help them to process that.
Yeah, it's nice to learn that parents are just imperfect people too, trying to figure things out. And especially with a lot of people who are first or second generation immigrants, parents are in survival mode when they come to North America.
Yes, I agree. Because all they do, they just, all they just do, they save money, work. But then again, at the same time, they sort of neglected the kids by not being there for support, or the emotional or the physical support. Then we as kids, then we start need to become independent or fend for ourselves, right? That also become quite isolated growing up.
And what happens if one goes to therapy? Let's say they go to therapy, they have more empathy for the way that their parents grew up, and they have a better relationship with their parents, but they're not necessarily ready to become best friends with their parents, or everything is roses. Is that a normal outcome from therapy?
Yes, because then I think sometimes when I'm working with my client, they have these unrealistic expectation that now I'm working on myself. I'm hoping to have a better relationship with my parents. But I think as a therapist, I also have to help them understand, just because you're changing doesn't mean they're going to be changing with you, right? Unless your parents go to therapy to work on themselves, or you guys do family therapy to working through some of these trauma, some of these issues together, then that can help you to develop better relationship. And it sucks because at the same time, I'm also have to support my client to grieve the relationship that they never had, or they might never have with their parents. Sometimes that, what I see, whether it's for my own mom or whether for my clients' parents, is that like they might change once in a while. Maybe they'll like say, I'm really proud of you all of a sudden, right? Like, I don't know what triggered them to say it, but sometimes it just is like, oh, that's weird. Like, why can't you say it like all the time? Why does it have to be like all of a sudden then, right? And it just become very like awkward. It's also hard for us to like to sit with the uncomfortableness. I think one thing is that, I find that a lot of parents, our parents' generation, they're not really good at using words. Like for that, the words of validation, despite we want them to validate us using words. But instead, their love language is to like, doing things for us. Whether it's like driving us to the subway station, or whether it's peeling fruits, or whether it's like give us like food that they prepare. That's their love, like there's their love language. They're showing that they do care about us.
Oh my gosh, I myself, and I'm probably so many people who have grown up in Asian households can relate, where you could probably count on one hand how many times your parents have told you that they're proud of you, but you have no idea how many times your parents have given you food that they've prepared. And yeah, you have to kind of reconcile with, oh, I would love if I had that verbal affirmation, but I have to accept that these other actions are how I'm going to get affection in this household.
Of course. And I think one thing is that even though they're not capable, or they can't tell you that they're proud of you using words of affirmation, sometimes they'll go behind our back and start like, telling their friends or like their siblings about how proud they are of us. They just can't say it, unfortunately, in front of us. Yeah.
You know what? Every time I meet one of my parents' coworkers, and my parents will listen to this, and I don't think anything I'm saying is a surprise, but whenever I meet any of my parents' friends or coworkers, they're always like, your parents are so proud of you and your siblings. And I'm like, they tell you guys, but they don't tell us. But I understand that that's probably just the result of, their own intergenerational trauma and the own way that they grew up. And that's the capacity for verbal affection that they have. And it's just the reality of it.
Yes. Or like sometimes, like I wish, sometimes my clients, I wish they would just hug us, right? Like that physical touch. Like, wanting that as part of the love language. But I'm like, I don't think they can. Like, they're just not used to, right? Because in North American culture, like we hug, right? That's that physical touch as part of the love language. But I'm like, unfortunately, they probably didn't have that growing up. Their parents didn't probably hug them or providing them that support. So it's hard for them. But funny thing is that our parents would hug their grandchildren.
Yeah.
Right? Or would say, I love you to the grandchildren, but they won't say it to us, right?
There you go. At least I hope that if anybody is going through that journey and they're improving their relationship with their parents, but it's not, again, like the nuclear families that we grew up seeing on TV, there's no reason to be ashamed about it. Because I feel like people could feel ashamed that they've done all this work, but it's still not that picture perfect result.
Yes. I think it's at the same time that you can't really compare, right? Because everyone have different experiences. Yes, we might want, our parents, like whether it's like validating us or having that words of affirmation, but at the same time, they just can't say it, or they don't know how to say it, right? But by showing like action, like, giving us food, I think that's a sign. Like, I think that's something that we have to reframe. Like you said, reconcile. That's the way of how they're showing their love for us.
So I want to ask you for advice for people who might be looking for therapists or determining if a therapist that they're working with is right for them. So if there's somebody who's looking for a therapist and they want to speak to somebody who might have a shared identity, whether it's race or cultural backgrounds, or somebody who might be queer looking for a queer therapist, what's the best way for somebody to find a therapist?
One thing is that there's a lot of different platforms out there now, right? That you can do a search, whether it's Psychology Today or Asian Mental Health Collective. But in there, they have different criteria that you can find a match. And nowadays, a lot of therapists, they offer this 15 to 30-minute consultation that you can do just to, understand what, their background, ask them questions about like what kind of issue that their specialties are, or even like what type of therapy or education or training that they have done. I think those are very important questions, and get a sense whether you like the therapist or not. Because it's finding a therapist is I tell all my potential clients, I'm like, it's kind of like dating, right? You need to shop around to find the right fit for you. And sometimes that you might have to do like 1 or 2 sessions to determine whether the therapist is a right fit, even though that you thought is a right fit over the phone. But unless you try it out yourself, then then you kind of know, okay, well, I want to continue with this therapist. No, I don't think it's a good fit, etc. I think there's no right or wrong. I know it takes a long time. It just basically is the same thing as like dating or like finding the right partner for the rest of your life, right? Because you want somebody that can understand and support your needs in your therapy journey.
Oh yeah, it takes a long time, but I mean, it's work that is so important that something that's going to have as amazing of an outcome as therapy can have. Of course, it takes time and effort. Although I do remember a few years ago seeing a meme that was like, "Oh, can't I just prepare a one-pager with all of my traumas and hand it to my new therapist so I can just like skip over the first few sessions?" Because I'm like, yeah, I understand it's hard trying to get everyone on board with your life story, but it's part of it.
That's right. Because the therapist, we need to understand like not just a presenting issue, but some of your history, your childhood history growing up, right? That can also help us as therapists how to help you to determine your treatment goals and what it looks like.
If somebody has been seeing a therapist and they feel like they're not getting that much out of it, what is your advice for them?
I think it's also be honest with your therapist. Hey, like I don't feel it's a good fit, right? I know it's sometimes people who are more the avoidance type that they just tend to like cancel the appointment and not reschedule. But I think being honest with your therapist and also they can also help your therapist figure out like what, whether is it just a fit, or is it just something that, whether it's something that there was an issue that you got triggered during therapy session to really work through that with communication. Or that's okay if you don't find it's a good fit, then your therapist can refer you to other therapists that can best support you. I think it's just that, being honest and being open will help you to get further.
I know you said earlier that people should see therapists on a regular basis. So how does one determine what's the best frequency for them?
It really varies, right? It really depends on, so for example, as as a therapist, I think like for me, I have my own certain rules of how often I want to see my clients. And then, so for example, in the beginning, I tend to see my client on a weekly basis, just because there's so much issue, there's so much stuff to process. And then afterwards, after 5, 6 sessions, we tend to space it out into either bi-weekly, so that give the client to have more time to work through their issue. Then when they're really doing really well, they can either pause therapy or they can just space it out into a monthly check-in. So because there's no right or wrong, because sometimes that when you are just, if you just think you can just come in once a month in the beginning, then, it's more of a supportive counseling versus, working through some of the issue.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to look the same for everybody all the
That's right.
time.
That's right.
Your therapy needs will be different depending on where you're at in life and what you're working on.
That's right. That's right.
So then one more. What do you do if you've been working with a therapist and then you feel like, you know what, maybe they're not the right fit for me anymore? How do you move forward?
I think, like I said, it's also being honest and
Hmm.
let them know, hey, like I don't think this is working out. Sometimes your therapist might ask further, like what happened, why is it not working out? Because then also help your therapist to really reflect on, is there something that they can provide more support for you, or maybe the style. I'm just as an example, maybe the styles it's not
Hmm.
fitting well with you anymore. Their like the therapist style, right? I think that you know oftentimes that I understand like as a client on the client side, I know their clients sometimes they want to be open or they just want to avoid it by just canceling the appointment. And
Hmm.
that's totally okay. But I think that in a role just as in a role reversal, like if you were to date somebody, like
Hmm.
wouldn't you want the other person to be open to you that hey, it's not working out versus just like ghosting? Whether it's
Hmm.
ghosting or just say, hey, I just want to cancel and not rebook again.
Hmm. Yeah. Empathy on all sides of the therapy relationship.
Yes, I think that's also will help you to become like to build that like therapeutic like alliances, right? I think that's quite important because obviously your therapist is really wanting to be there to support you and your therapy journey, and that's totally okay. Sometimes that you went through a few sessions and it's not what you're expecting, and that happened.
Good advice for everybody. Vera, thank you so much for chatting today. What are you working on now that people can follow along?
Oh, I want to share so much, but I can't share just because like there's a lot of like things that are happening in the background that I can't really
Hmm.
openly like share. There's just like a lot of different project that I'm in the background that I'm actually doing right now. But I am still accepting clients right now for therapy that I'm doing. But I'm also doing one thing I've been promoting on my Instagram is the therapist coaching. So for any therapists that are wanting to start private practice, I'm also coaching, for therapists who are wanting to get into private practice as well. Um, and I'm just trying to think what else. I think that's all I can share
Hmm.
with you
Ooh.
right now.
Okay, that's exciting to know that things are happening. We love to
Yeah,
hear that. And then
yeah,
that means, I think that that is a good sign for everybody, right? Because it means that there's enough activity around Asian mental health. So then that means for everybody, we're moving forward. So you being busy, I think, is a positive thing for the Asian community here in Canada.
yeah. No, for sure. Because right now, because I'm based out in Toronto, like Ontario, I can only see clients in Ontario right now. But there are some exciting news that are gonna happen soon. I just can't release until everything gets firm.
Okay, if people want to make sure they're ready for the exciting news, then where can they follow you?
They can follow me on Instagram. So my handle is talktherapy.with.vera, or they can go on my website talktherapywithvera.com. That's the best bet that they can reach out to me for support.
Amazing. I will definitely follow along and I cannot wait to see what this amazing news is. But until then, thank you so much for today. I got so much great insight from you and I'm sure the listeners did. So thank you so much, Vera.
Thanks for having me today, Erika. I'm really glad to be able to come on your show and just start talking about the importance of mental health and therapy.
So much of that conversation resonated with me. In particular, I realized that there is less need to feel guilty or shameful than I thought there was. So, thank you so much, Vera Cheng, for really validating so much of the lived experience I've had. And thank you so much for chatting with me today. Now it's time to answer a listener question. And this is a question I have been asked a lot by one listener in particular. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to answer it. So if you're the listener, you know who you are. The question is, when will you splurge and get a purple Louis Vuitton bag? Well, I do have a Louis Vuitton bag and it is purple. And you know what? My relationship with this bag might be the result of intergenerational trauma. So it actually suits this episode well. Tell me if anybody has any weird shame or weird guilt around owning something very expensive. And I'll tell you a bit about this bag. So this was a stunning Louis Vuitton tote bag. I saw it online and I'm going to post a photo of this bag on this Instagram stories of the podcast account. So you should go and look at it. And when I saw it, I thought, okay, this is me in bag form. It was like unicorn colored, where it was purple, pink, blue, light green ombre all over. And then the LV logos are different colors. And I just knew that I didn't do a lot to splurge on myself after I had won Survivor. And I thought, okay, this can be one of my few luxury purchases where it's just a treat for me and that's it. So I go to the Louis Vuitton store just north of Toronto. And then it turns out they have the bag and it's one of 3 in Canada. And I get it and I am just in love with it. Now here's where the weird fear/guilt comes from owning something like this. I used it when I went on a trip a few months later. I used it as my personal item on a plane. And then I found I would just get so nervous about this bag. I'd get so many people who came up and talked to me about it, so many compliments, rightfully so. It's a beautiful bag. And then one thing led to another. And then I ended up having a connecting flight canceled and I had to get an airport hotel for the night. And I was only going to stay in the airport hotel for like 5 hours. It was either that or I could sleep on the floor in the airport. But I was like, no, I need to protect the bag. So I'm going to spend the money on an airport hotel. And I remember getting to that airport hotel so late. And then there were just people hanging around in the lobby and they got into the elevator with me. And they're like staring at me in the bag saying, oh, that's a nice bag. Where did you get it? Was it expensive? And I don't know. Again, maybe I'm being paranoid. Tell me if you would be paranoid in this situation. But then that night in that hotel room, I like slept in the bed with the bag with me under the covers because I was like, I have to protect this bag. Now, I know this sounds wild because it is just a bag. So I don't know why I have this bag security anxiety. Also, I love the bag. I, make sure that it stays nicely on the shelf, blah, 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 all that fun stuff. So all that's to say is I love this purple Louis Vuitton bag that I have. And I will probably eventually get another bag, but I want to make sure that, I don't know, for me, it's still like a splurge and it's still something that I want to commemorate a special moment in my life. So I think next time I reach some type of milestone and I want to celebrate, I could see myself getting another Louis Vuitton bag. But right now, this bag and the bag anxiety I feel is enough for me. And also, I don't want to, I don't want to make the bag feel guilty, even though I know it's just an inanimate object. So the bag doesn't only make me feel anxiety, okay? I also love this bag. So thank you for bearing with me and listening to me talk about my bag anxiety. And please, please let me know in the comments if any of this resonates with you or if you think that I'm overreacting. Actually, don't tell me that because that's just going to make me overreact more. But thank you to the listener for submitting a question. If you have any questions for me, feel free to send me a DM at happy to see me on Instagram, or rather at happy to see me pod on Instagram, or write it in the comments of the YouTube video because hopefully I can get to your question in a future episode. If you haven't already, I would love if you could subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. The podcast is on Instagram and on YouTube. It's at Happy to See Me Pod. Thank you so much for spending time with me every week, and I will be happy to see you every Monday.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Sonar Network.